I saw a werewolf drinking a pina colada at Trader Vic's. His hair was perfect. Ahoo, Vikings of London. That didn't work, did it? Oh, I had to try, though. You know I had to try. That is the news today on Vikes Now. I'm Dustin Baker. This is the May 4th edition, Wednesday. The news that we're going to talk about for about 15 minutes is the Vikings, not the Werewolves of London. The team is going once again to England to take on the New Orleans Saints. So we're going to chat about some facts to do with that, primarily some historical stuff. So hopefully you're intrigued by this. If you're not, tell me in the comments, and I'll never make such a show again about boring topics. But I think this one will be kind of cool. One of the biggest takeaways foremost about the Vikings and Saints is this is actually a good game, a matchup, a quasi-rivalry, especially for Vikings fans, probably for Saints fans. I don't know if the general world thinks like, ooh, this is a big rivalry, but you know it. You know that there's bad blood there, and usually with these these London contests, the games are shitty. Last year, I think it was the Dolphins and Jaguars, and then the Falcons and Jets. No good. So when I started to hear these rumors 2 or 3 weeks ago about the Saints and Vikings, I was like, ooh, this would sweeten the deal. Typically, Englanders get these crappy games, and that's just it. There's nothing they can do about it. They're just happy to get football in an otherwise, soccer stadium or their kind of football. But yeah, that's the big takeaway, is that it's actually kind of a cool rivalry game, and the opponents, at least in our estimation, are fringe playoff teams, and ordinarily they're just bottom feeders, teams that are going to be at the top of the NFL draft the following spring. That shouldn't be the case unless the Vikings or Saints are unexpectedly bad. So you know how it goes. This game will be on at 8:30 a.m. If you don't travel to London for it, I think I might take the family, checking it out. I'll see how much tickets are. I think I can swing the airfare. But that's the first thing out of the gate from Central Time Zone anyhow, is this is going to be an afternoon where you get up to watch football really early, and then you'll transition into what we call the noon game, whoever that might be, then to the 3:15 game, 3:25, whatever it is, and Sunday Night Football. So on October 2nd, I know you'll get up to watch the Vikings, but then you'll get a whole damn day of football. And what could be better than that? But mark it down, that game for your time zones, if you're in Minnesota or South Dakota or Iowa, Central Time Zone will be at 8:30. So since the NFC Championship of 2009 that broke your damn heart, the Saints, generally speaking, in 8 games, including playoffs, have the Vikings number, which surprises people. The Drew Brees-led Saints are 5-3 against the Vikings since the 2009 NFC Championship. Now, it doesn't really feel like it because the Vikings have ended their playoff dreams twice in the last 5 years. The Minneapolis Miracle, authored by Case Keenum, Stephon Diggs in 2017. I was there for that one. Probably a top 5 life moment for me because I just didn't see it coming. And I looked around for flags for about 5 minutes after Diggs scored, just thinking this is too good to be true. This doesn't happen to us. And then not quite as cool, but teetering was the walk-off by Kyle Rudolph and Kirk Cousins in 2019 that ended a season that was also Super Bowl or bust for the Saints, which they typically were in the final 3 or 4 seasons of Brees' career. There was, I think I've talked about it before on the show, from 2014 to 2016. Saints went 7-9, 3 straight years, shitty defense, nobody cared. Sean Payton was safe, Drew Brees wasn't washed, he wasn't considered a mediocre quarterback, and then they addressed their defense and got better, and boom, they started contending. Now they're in life without Brees. So last year they had Jameis Winston, Ian Book, Trevor Siemian, and Taysom Hill as their foursome of quarterbacks, and this year they're going with Jameis again. So on the whole, I think since 2000 the Vikings have the win-loss. I think it's 8-7 against the Saints since 2000, but recently, since the damn NFC Championship, it's 3-5. So there's some score settling to be done there. This is also the first game that the Vikings will play without Sean Payton attached to the roster since 2004. That 2004 game was a triumph in the Metrodome. They won 38-31 behind a great evening. It was a Sunday night game from Weldy Moore, Nate Burleson, Randy Moss, and Dante Culpepper. And that was the last time that Breeze or Peyton weren't associated with the Saints when the Vikings play them. It was the Aaron Brooks show and Jim Haslett show taking on Mike Tice's Minnesota Vikings. So this will look and feel a lot different when they play the Saints. This isn't the Saints of the last decade. This is a new breed, new coach, and whoever they try out at quarterback, which figures by week 4 to be Jameis Winston. And Winston, so the deal on him last year is he was efficient, was a winning quarterback until he got hurt. So he did have a mini reclamation, getting away from those 30 interceptions or 33 interceptions, was it? 30 interceptions in 2019. So he didn't do that shit last year, all the inaccuracy. He seemed to rein that in with Sean Payton and whatever eye surgery he has. So he can no longer be considered just a moron that eats W's and throws interceptions. He's actually pretty good. And we'll see if it continues. First round pick in whatever draft that was, 2012, 2013. So we know that there is a pedigree to be good in there somewhere. But he needs a clean bill of health for a full season to figure out if he's back on track as a QB1. If they flounder and do something like the Vikings and go 8-9, he ain't going to work there anymore. They'll go draft one of the monsters of rock prospects like C.J. Stroud from this next draft class. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Who knows? They could be good. This new coach might be able to bring them back to relevance after a one-year hiatus. They weren't even that bad last year. They just didn't get to the postseason. They got close, but they didn't quite get there. Another frame of reference for this London game on October 2nd. This can be considered revenge for Christmas of 2020. You'll remember it vividly. The Saints scored 7 rushing touchdowns, 6 of them by Alvin Kamara, in a putrid defensive showing from Mike Zimmer's Vikings. The worst run defense that I've ever seen associated with Mike Zimmer, and you'd be hard-pressed to find a worse defense even from the Mike Tice days from that game. It was all, they just gashed right up the middle. Didn't matter. I think Kendricks was out. Oh, of course, Neil Hunter was out. And it was just, there was doldrums. I remember watching that on Christmas thinking, oh, God. And that was also the same game in the aftermath that fans were like, whoa, we need a quarterback who can get into a shootout like this. And some of us on the other side were saying, well, it was 52-33. If they just would have held them to 32 points in a real strong defensive effort, they probably could have won the game. But I got into a couple notable arguments that afternoon about blaming Cousins for a 52-33 shootout loss. I couldn't believe it. On Christmas Day, no less. This is supposed to be Yuletide. What are we thinking? But yeah, the Vikings can get back on the right track and beat the Saints in London because they have a sour taste in their mouth from December 25, 2020. So remember the early game time. That's a big one. That's a bombshell, so to speak. And then this will be the 5th ever football game at, I'm not going to pronounce it right, Tottenham Spur Stadium. I'm sure there's some British way to pronounce it, but my ancestors are Norwegian and Irish, so I'm not going to bother with any British pronunciation, but I think it's Tottenham Spur Stadium, something like that. I'll get the pronunciation down before October 2nd, I promise you. Temperature is usually in the 60s around that time, so it kind of feels like here in the Midwest, in America anyhow. Shouldn't be any crazy weather. Could be rain, of course, but that stadium is modern, so I think you can shut the roof and all that. But yeah, it'll be the 5th ever game at that recently erected stadium in 2019. A couple more things to remember that are arguably more important than these other facts I'm doling out. This should indicate an early bye week for your Minnesota Vikings. Most people don't like those. Why? Because you want to have a later bye week to get men healthy for the final stretch of the season. And I think any playoff team given the choice, could be wrong here, but I don't think I am, would rather have a late bye week. But this indicates that the Vikings bye week will probably be early, and we'll find out in 8 days, because that's when the full NFL schedule drops, and you'll figure out what surrounds this Week 4 game with the Vikings and Saints. But that's usually how London participants ended up, is with an early bye week, which sucks. But I think that's the trade-off for getting that London fandom exposure. Oh, what was the other? Okay, so yeah, these two teams, New Orleans Saints, Minnesota Vikings, both are 2-0 overseas in London. This is the rubber match. Now, that's not a huge sample size, but it's kind of cool that the Vikings last won their 33-16, I think, over the Browns in 2017. I'll never forget that game because it was the Browns when they were the Browns, and the Vikings kind of started off like, we think we're good, this purple team, we're playing these Browns who are never good, but then they ended up blowing the doors off of them and making it non-competitive. But that was also a fragile time in the 2017 season where I think every single one of us was trying to figure out, is this team really good? Like, is the bottom going to fall out with Case Keenum? He can't be this unearthed gem that nobody knew about. As it turned out, it was a lightning in a bottle season. It was marvelous. They should have got to the Super Bowl if they wouldn't have just forgot to show up to play in Philadelphia that afternoon. But I remember that Browns game because there was a handful. I think they played at Atlanta. Oh, and there was another one. I can't think of which matchup it was. But each, in the innards of that season, I remember thinking, like, are we really this good? Do I need to get excited? Eventually you bought into it, and it was worth it, arguably, because of the miracle game. But before that, in 2013, the Vikings also won in London, knocked off the Pittsburgh Steelers, led by Ben Roethlisberger. They were in a transition year, so to speak, kind of like those Saints I mentioned from 2014 to 2016, where they have a mediocre campaign that goes 7-9 or 8-8 or 9-7. At that time, it would have been either 8-8 or 9-7 for the Steelers because they didn't have 17 games. But yeah, usually when teams like the Saints, the Chiefs, or the Steelers, or the Patriots have a season like that, 8-8, 9-7, nobody cares because they're considered a sturdy franchise who has a Super Bowl pedigree. And when they need a transitional season to pivot to a mini roster rebuild, go ahead and take it. When the Vikings do that, it's called mediocrity, and they can't get out of their own way. They don't know what they're doing. So that's some context there on the Steelers team that they beat in 2013. It was a Tomlin-led team. It was decent, and that was one of the final wins by Leslie Frazier. That season eventually ended with his termination and the end of Christian Ponder and the pivot to Mike Zimmer, Teddy Bridgewater, Matt Castle, and all that fun stuff. And then before I got on air here, I was checking Twitter for any Vikings developments, and NFL.com is calling this matchup between the Saints and Vikings delicious. The Vikings even tweeted the video clip with Kyle Brandt in it, who said Cousins and Winston equals delicious football. He thinks it'll be a 48-45 shootout, even though the Saints had the second best defense in the world last year per EPA per play. So I don't know if it'll be a shootout. I don't know where that's coming from. But for him and for NFL.com, evidently Winston versus Cousins isn't this big, mediocre quarterback gunslinger battle. It's actually supposed to put some butts in seats. Kind of goes back to my point about, wow, the Vikings and Saints are actually going to London as opposed to some trash like the Lions and the Texans. That's usually what you do. You get up at 8:30 for these London games. You go downstairs because you're excited about football. You turn on the TV and there's some bullshit on it like, oh, the Texans with Davis Mills versus Jared Goff's Lions. That's what London gets. This time they're not getting it. They're getting the Vikings and Saints, a continuation of a rivalry that's been brewing since 2009. All I have for Vikes Now today. Hopefully you investigate whether or not you can travel to England to see that game. The stadium is huge and should be tickets available. Otherwise, you'll have to get up early in your living room or go to your bar earlier than normal to check it out. I will be back on Thursday for more Vikes Now stuff and Skol, baby.